Close your eyes and imagine. Under the crimson sunset of Mesopotamia, iron chariots thunder across the plains, archers stand shoulder to shoulder on the ramparts, and banners bearing the image of the god Ashur ripple in the wind. This is Assyria, the steel empire of the ancient world, where military power was pushed to its absolute peak, and kings were both ruthless warriors and patrons of art and knowledge. From smoke-filled campaigns to golden palaces and vast libraries, Assyria wrote a glorious chapter of history, leaving behind a legacy that mankind both feared and admired. But like all empires, that brilliance would one day fade, and their story begins here. On the arid yet fertile lands of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris River flows like the lifeblood of time, a people once rose from humble villages to become one of the most feared empires in human history. Their name, Assyria, echoes across millennia, forever tied to the thunder of galloping hooves. The screech of chariot wheels cutting through the earth, and massive walls casting shadows beneath a blazing sun. But before they became the Iron Empire that spread terror far and wide, Assyria endured a long journey of formation, trials, and ascension. The story begins in the city of Ashur, a small settlement on the west bank of the Tigris River in what is now northern Iraq. Around the 3rd millennium BCE, Ashur was merely a local trade center where merchants exchanged linen, cedar wood, copper, tin, and agricultural produce with neighboring lands. The people worshipped the god Ashur, the city's patron deity, who would later become the supreme symbol of the entire empire. What made early Assyria remarkable was not its military strength, but its strategic location. Situated between the trade routes linking Mesopotamia to Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and the Iranian plateau, Ashur became an important stopover. From here, the Assyrians learned the art of commerce, organizational skill, and diplomatic tact, elements they would later weaponize to expand their domain. However, that peace did not last. By the late 3rd millennium BCE, Assyria fell under the orbit of stronger empires. They were successively dominated by Sumer, Akkad, and later Old Babylon. Each time they were conquered, the Assyrians learned something from their oppressors. From Sumer, they absorbed cuneiform writing. From Akkad, the methods of governing vast territories. From Babylon, architectural techniques and legal codes. These lessons gradually seeped in, forming the foundation of a people quietly gathering strength. Around 2000 BCE, a turning point occurred. The Amorites, a semi-nomadic group from the region of Syria, infiltrated Assyria and established a new dynasty. Under King Shamshi-Adad, c. 1809–1776 BCE, Assyria for the first time became a unified kingdom with a significantly expanded territory. Shamshi-Adad was a brilliant strategist, using both military might to conquer nearby lands and centralized administration, placing his sons in charge of strategic regions. Though his dynasty was short-lived, it proved that Assyria could indeed rise beyond its narrow borders. In the following century, Assyria weakened under the dominance of Babylon during the reign of Hammurabi. Yet even in weakness, they retained their identity and pride in their origins. They were frontier dwellers, accustomed to harsh conditions, always ready to resist invaders. By the 14th century BCE, Assyria entered what is called the Middle Assyrian period. This was when their military identity began to crystallize. Under rulers such as Ashur-uballit I and Adad-nirari I, Assyria defeated the Mitanni, a powerful kingdom to the northwest, and extended their domain into Syria. No longer a quiet frontier land, Assyria had become a regional power capable of threatening both Babylon and the Hittites. What set Assyria apart during this era was the combination of military discipline and organizational ability. The Assyrian army was not just made of fearless warriors, but was structured into professional units: spearmen with large shields, skilled archers, swift cavalry, and above all, chariots, the ultimate weapon on the battlefield at the time. Every campaign was meticulously prepared with full logistics, pontoon bridges, siege engines, and engineering corps to cross rivers or breach fortress walls. From around 1200 BCE, after the Near East was shaken by the collapse of many civilizations caused by the so-called Sea Peoples, Assyria entered a golden age. They quickly occupied lands left in a power vacuum, imposing their dominance over weaker nations. But what was remarkable was that they did not just conquer. They implemented mass deportations, forcibly relocating thousands from one region to another to break resistance and harness labor for grand projects. This policy was both brutal and effective in maintaining control. In the 9th century BCE, under Ashurbanipal II and Shalmaneser III, Assyria truly became an empire of relentless expansion. Their campaigns reached the shores of the Mediterranean, forcing many kingdoms to pay tribute in gold, silver, rare timber, and soldiers. The capital, Kalhu, Nimrud, was rebuilt into a dazzling center of power, with grand palaces, fortified walls, and stone reliefs narrating victories. At this stage, Assyria did not just fight to seize land. They fought to build an image. Every triumph was carved into reliefs, recorded in cuneiform, and spread as a message of intimidation to any who dared resist. They understood that power lay not only in strength, but also in the fear that strength instilled. The first chapter closes with a scene straight from a film. On the palace walls of Ashurbanipal II, the king stands tall upon his chariot, bow in hand, eyes fixed ahead. Behind him, ranks of soldiers stand in perfect order. Before him, enemies flee in chaos. The sky burns red, dust swirls upward, and the pounding of hooves echoes against stone cliffs like the drums of destiny. Assyria had stepped into the light, and from here they would not stop, until the entire Near East lay under their banner. By the 8th century BCE, the skies over the Near East were being redrawn under the spear points and chariot wheels of Assyria. No longer just a regional kingdom, Assyria now bore the ambition to become the supreme empire of the age, and to achieve that, they needed more than military victories. They required a governing system capable of holding together hundreds of diverse peoples, stretching from the Zagros Mountains in the east to the Mediterranean coast in the west, from the Armenian highlands in the north to the Arabian desert in the south. In this context, Tiglath-Pileser III, reigned 745–727 BCE, appeared like a storm. This king was not only a brilliant general, but also a hardline reformer. Before his time, Assyria had relied heavily on allies and temporary forces raised only during the campaign season. Tiglath-Pileser III shattered that model, creating a standing army, something unprecedented in the ancient Near East. The Assyrian military was now divided into clearly defined units: heavy infantry, light infantry, archers, cavalry, and chariots. Each unit was uniformly equipped, rigorously trained, and most importantly, always ready for battle. This allowed Assyria to wage war year-round, regardless of harvest cycles or weather conditions. No longer bound by the rhythms of agriculture, Assyria became a tireless war machine. Tiglath-Pileser III was also infamous for his iron and blood policy. When a region rebelled, he would not only defeat its army, but also mete out severe punishment, destroying cities, executing leaders, and deporting tens of thousands of inhabitants. To him, fear was the most effective weapon for maintaining power. Brutal as it was, This policy made many regions think twice before defying Assyria. Under Tiglath-Pileser III, Assyria's territory expanded rapidly. They conquered much of Syria, crushed the northern kingdom of Israel, and imposed control over the Phoenician coastal cities, wealthy trading hubs. Gold, silver, cedar wood, jewelry, and luxury goods flowed into the capital like an unending river. After Tiglath-Pileser III, Shalmaneser V and Sargon II carried the torch of expansion. One of the most resounding victories of this era was the conquest of Samaria, the capital of Israel's northern kingdom, in 722 BCE. Tens of thousands of Israelites were exiled to distant lands, part of the forced relocation policy that had become Assyria's signature. Sargon II, a king no less ambitious, moved the capital to Dur-Sharrukin, modern Khorsabad, a newly built city of monumental scale. Massive walls, intricately carved palaces, and colossal Lamassu statues guarding the gates were erected not only for living, but to proclaim the power and prestige of the empire. Yet even this grandeur was not the true pinnacle. That came under Sennacherib, reigned 705 to 681 BCE, a figure praised as a military genius, yet reviled as the embodiment of cruelty. Under his reign, Assyria waged one of its most famous campaigns, the Siege of Jerusalem in 701 BCE. Although the city was not completely destroyed due to political factors and an outbreak of disease, the campaign solidified Assyria's image as an unstoppable force. Sennacherib was also the man who transformed Nineveh into the new capital, a supercity of the ancient world. Under his command, Nineveh became a sprawling metropolis with walls over 12 kilometers long, a palace without rival, and a sophisticated canal system supplying water. He built gardens, temples, and archives of cuneiform tablets, the forerunner of the royal library to come. However, Sennacherib was notorious for his temper and ruthless decisiveness. When Babylon rebelled against Assyria, he not only suppressed the uprising but razed the entire city in 689 BCE, an act that shocked the entire region. To many, it was proof that Assyria would annihilate any symbol threatening its authority. After Sennacherib, his son Esarhaddon, reigned 681-669 BCE, continued the expansion, even defeating Egypt and capturing Memphis, a feat few in the Near East had achieved. Esarhaddon also rebuilt Babylon after his father's destruction, showing a softer side to imperial policy. He understood that reconciliation and reconstruction could also secure lasting power. But even with moments of conciliation, Assyria remained an empire fueled by war. Its military was a colossal machine consuming resources and manpower. But in return, it brought spoils of war, new territories, and the respect, or fear, of its neighbors. As Part 2 closes, we see Assyria at the height of its power, with its banner flying from the Arabian desert to the Mediterranean coast, from the Nile Delta to the Armenian highlands. Yet, beneath the brilliance, cracks had begun to appear. In the hearts of the subjugated peoples, in the steadily draining treasury, and within the ambitious, war-hungry Assyrian court itself. As Assyria entered the 7th century BCE, the glitter of the empire seemed to reach its absolute zenith. The gold-covered palaces of Nineveh, Dur-Sharrukin, and Kalhu blazed beneath the Mesopotamian sun. Spoils of war from across the Near East poured in, cedar wood from Lebanon, gemstones from Armenia, gold and silver from Egypt, ivory, amber, and exotic luxuries from lands far beyond the horizon. But behind this painting of prosperity, Assyria had stepped into a phase that every empire must face, an era of arrogance and endless wars. After Esarhaddon, the throne passed to Ashurbanipal, reigned 669-627 BCE. a king remembered as both a proud warrior and an erudite scholar. If Sennacherib was infamous for his cruelty, and Esarhaddon was remembered for both conquest and diplomacy, Ashurbanipal is revered by posterity for his unmatched intellect and boundless ambition. The moment he ascended the throne, threats surrounded him. Egypt still dreamed of restoring its power. Babylon remained a constant source of rebellion, and to the east, the ancient kingdom of Elam lingered as a thorn in Assyria's side. Ashurbanipal did not merely confront these threats, he obliterated them. The war with Elam, breath of destruction Elam, lying southeast of Mesopotamia, modern-day southwestern Iran, had clashed with Assyria many times. Under Ashurbanipal, this long-standing enmity reached its climax. In 647 BCE, after a series of conflicts, Assyrian forces stormed Susa, the Elamite capital. What followed was one of the most devastating acts of destruction in ancient history. The city was burned, temples demolished, divine statues hauled to Nineveh as trophies, and the kingdom of Elam vanished from the political map. Cuneiform inscriptions from the time record: "I swept the land of Elam from the face of the earth like a storm. Their cries are no longer heard." Ashurbanipal. The rise of the royal library, though a ruthless conqueror on the battlefield, Ashurbanipal harbored a deep passion for knowledge. He founded the Royal Library of Nineveh, collecting tens of thousands of clay tablets from across the Near East, texts covering history, medicine, astronomy, law, and especially literary works such as the Epic of Gilgamesh. This library was not merely Assyria's treasure, but a priceless gift to posterity. More than 2,000 years later, when archaeologists unearthed it, it became a window through which humanity could understand Mesopotamian civilization. Cracks in the Colossus. Yet, even at its peak, signs of collapse appeared. Governing such a vast territory demanded colossal resources. The standing army drained the treasury. Continuous campaigns exhausted both the empire's core and its subject peoples. Though terrified, these subjugated nations quietly nursed hopes of rebellion when the chance arose. The royal family itself was not free from strife. After Esarhaddon's death, he had divided power. Ashurbanipal ruled Assyria, while his brother Shamash-Shum-Ukin governed Babylon. At first, this was a balanced arrangement, but over time, fraternal bonds turned into bitter enmity. In 652 BCE, Babylon allied with Elam, Aram, and numerous city-states, rising against Assyria. The war dragged on for 4 years, ending with Babylon's fall. Ashurbanipal, despite being the elder brother, showed no mercy. The city was devastated, and Shamash-Shum-Ukin perished in flames. While this cemented Ashurbanipal's authority, it deepened the hatred across many lands. Glory and the price to pay. By the end of Ashurbanipal's reign, the Assyrian map encompassed nearly the entire Near East. But behind the victories lay a grim truth. The empire was weary. The administrative system, though sophisticated, was straining under the weight of governance. Campaigns no longer yielded the economic gains they once had, while new enemies emerged on every front: the Scythians in the north, the Medes in the east, and Babylon, ever a rebel at heart. The closing scene of this chapter is like a cinematic tableau. On the palace walls of Nineveh, Ashurbanipal is depicted lounging in a garden, goblet in hand, with the severed head of the Elamite king hanging as a trophy behind him. In the distance, the sunset paints the Mesopotamian sky red, beautiful, yet heralding a long night to come. Assyria stood atop the world, but every step forward now brought it closer to the abyss. When Ashurbanipal died around 627 BCE, Assyria stood at a fateful crossroads. his successors were weak, lacking both the skill and the authority to sustain the colossal machine built by generations before them. History had shown that an empire built on military might could only last as long as that might endured, and Assyria was now running out of both men and resources. Centuries of relentless campaigns had drained the nation's strength. Treasuries once brimming with gold and silver now stood hollow. The army, still formidable on paper, was exhausted from the constant need to crush rebellions across the provinces. Subject peoples, once silently enduring, now realized the empire was no longer invincible and began to connect with one another, preparing for the day of vengeance. The seeds of disaster sprouted from within. Assyrian princes fought over the throne, the court sank into endless political intrigues, and the loyalty of generals waned as they sensed the crown's fragility. Many provincial governors, once obedient, now sought to strengthen their own power bases, ready to switch allegiance when the tide turned. Meanwhile, Assyria's ancient enemies, the Medes in the east and the Babylonians in the south, quietly forged an alliance, waiting for the moment to deliver a mortal blow. In 625 BCE, Nabopolassar, a Babylonian chieftain, launched a rebellion against Assyria. He swiftly captured much of the lower Tigris and Euphrates region. The empire, already weakened, could not crush the uprising as swiftly as it once had. The war dragged on, draining Assyria's remaining strength. To make matters worse, the Medes under King Cyaxares began striking from the east, cutting off key supply and communication lines between Nineveh and its provinces. The climax came in 612 BCE, when the Medo-Babylonian alliance, aided by the Scythians and other tribes, laid siege to Nineveh. The city, once the proud symbol of Assyrian power, now became a desperate fortress. The towering walls that had long been Assyria's shield no longer guaranteed safety. The enemy employed new siege techniques, smashed through gates, burned granaries, and severed the water supply. Inscriptions recount that the siege lasted for months, and when the final walls collapsed, Nineveh was engulfed in flames. The magnificent palaces of Sennacherib and Ashurbanipal fell, libraries were destroyed, and countless treasures were looted or turned to ash. The death of Nineveh was not merely the fall of a city. It was the death knell of an entire empire. After the battle, remnants of Assyria retreated to Haran in the northwest, clinging to survival for a few more years. But in 609 BCE, Haran too fell to the Medo-Babylonian alliance. The last Assyrian king, Ashur-uballit II, vanished from historical record after a final failed battle, leaving a massive power vacuum in Mesopotamia. The fall of Assyria stands as one of history's clearest examples of how an empire, seemingly invincible, can collapse in a short span when all the right conditions align. Weak leadership, endless wars, economic crisis, simultaneous uprisings of subject peoples, and the unity of once fragmented enemies. From its zenith, Assyria plummeted into the abyss in less than 20 years after Ashurbanipal's death. A swift end so shocking that many ancient historians could scarcely believe it. Yet even in defeat, Assyria's legacy endured. Its centralized administrative system, standing army, siege, and fortress-breaking techniques, and the wealth of knowledge in Nineveh's library left a profound mark on later civilizations. The Babylonians, and later the Persians, the Romans, and many others would learn from or be influenced by Assyrian innovations. The image of Assyrian warriors with pointed helmets, scale armor, longbows, and two-wheeled chariots remains etched in the imagination of posterity as the embodiment of absolute power. The final image of Assyria in this chapter is a blood-red sunset over the land that was once Nineveh. Amid the rubble and ashes, stone slabs depicting mighty kings now lie toppled. Reliefs of great victories lie buried in dust. The waters of the Tigris still flow, whispering the eternal truth that every empire, no matter how mighty, is but a fleeting moment in the endless current of time. Assyria once ruled the world, but now it survives only as a story told by the flickering firelight of historians for those who wish to hear of the glory and tragedy of one of history's greatest empires. Assyria was once the nightmare of all its enemies, the embodiment of absolute power in the ancient world. But from the proud Nineveh to the final stand at Haran, they witnessed it all: victory, glory, and inevitable downfall. The legacy of Assyria, from military innovations to the knowledge preserved in the Library of Nineveh, still echoes across millennia. This story ends here, but the lesson about power and the fragility of all empires remains as relevant as ever. See you in our next journey into the world's great civilizations.